Well, hello and welcome back to the podcast. As always, this is your host, Braden. And today I am joined by a friend and a colleague, Taylor Darcy, owner of Think Legal PC. Taylor, how's it going?
It's going good, going good. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the show. So, a little background for everyone. Taylor and I actually went to law school together. Sometimes it feels like it was last year. Sometimes it feels like it was like 15 years ago. But what was it, like 3, 4 years ago now? 4 or 5 years?
It's been at least four. Yeah.
Yes. And I can't, you graduated the year after me, right?
2017. So I don't know
Okay.
when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we had our tax class. Well, now I'm reminiscing. You were in my tax class, right?
Yep. We were in
Okay.
tax
I was like, I
law.
know we had like one class together. I couldn't remember. All right. So, context for everyone: you are now a fellow attorney, just like myself.
Mhm.
Took the bar exam, did the whole thing. Also based here in California, and we do a lot of some similar work. I think you do a lot of stuff that I don't do. Can you tell my audience a little bit about what you do in your practice and who you help?
Sure. So my passion is helping small businesses get started the right way. But I recognize that unfortunately, businesses enter dispute world, unfortunately, all the time. And so part of what I do is help them prevent disputes, but then also if they find themselves in the middle of a dispute, to be able to either get them out of it for the least amount of money as possible or get them the most money possible, whichever side I'm on. So yeah.
Nice. Okay. So this is good because as a lot of my audience knows, I do not handle litigation. This is often what happens. So for context for everyone, typically we tend to put ourselves in two different camps. And by ourselves, I mean attorneys. There are those of us who do like preventative law, transactional law, forming the businesses, setting up the contracts. And then there are attorneys that do litigation. So this is the area where you're suing people or you're getting sued, or also pre-litigation, having conversations about that. So Taylor, I'll often have people come to me and they want me to help them navigate a tricky client situation. And occasionally I'll say, you know what, I'll do a consultation. I'll help you kind of word your response email. But if it gets any more serious than that, you're going to need to go see a litigation attorney. So you help people from that point forward as well, correct?
Correct. Yes. I help them file, if necessary, complaint or defend if there's a complaint drawn against them. In a perfect world, like I like my clients to avoid litigation entirely. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it's stressful, but not everybody gets to me before that. So it just depends on their scenario.
Yes. Yeah. If we can stay out of court, that's always ideal because court is very expensive and it can get very ugly. Okay. So, what I want to talk about today, Taylor, is a different topic, something that I know that you've been talking about, and you do a YouTube series, right? Is that your primary content stream medium?
Yeah, so I do YouTube, but I also I simulcast to different Facebook groups, my page. So yeah, you can find me on all of those different things. But my primary is YouTube. Yep.
Nice. Okay, cool. And the topic we're going to talk about today is primarily buying and selling a business. So this is something that I know that you're quite knowledgeable on. Me, not so much. If someone's interested in buying and selling a business, I'd probably just send them to you. You could help them out. But let's start by talking about, well, I don't know. Where do you think we should start? Buying a business, selling a business, any foundational information the audience needs to know to kind of help lay the groundwork?
Um, they're two sides of the same coin, really.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when you start thinking about buying a business, people are looking at opportunities that the current business owner is avoiding. There's a book called Buy Then Build, something that I referenced quite a bit. But the real basic is if you're thinking about doing it, if you're on that thought process at all, starting early can either save you or make you money, right? That's really what we're talking about, because when you're dealing with a small business or a buy or a sell, right? When you buy a business, you want to buy it for the least amount possible. When you sell a business, you want to sell it for the most amount possible. So there's things and steps that you can take to make it so that you're going to get as fair of a price as possible, because that's really what we're talking about, the meeting of those two points where it's fair for both parties on the buy sell part side. So.
It's kind of, I mean, it's a lot like buying or selling a used car, right? So obviously what you want out of that transaction is dependent on whether you're buying or selling. And if you do your research ahead of time, that's going to help you when you're negotiating with the salesman, right?
And that's the exact analogy that I use all the time.
Oh, perfect.
If you're, yeah, I when I'm talking about buying and selling a business, when you're selling a car, right? If you take it to the dealership, with the wheels coming off of it, the paint job stinks, the inside hasn't been cleaned in weeks, months, years, whatever, you're not going to get the price that you're hoping for, right? That's just nobody's, the dealership, first of all, lowballs you, number one. And number two, it looks like crap. So if you take it to the dealership with it having been freshly painted, or not even painted, if it's just in good condition, not only are you going to get more money for it, but you may even consider not even go to the dealership to begin with. You'll sell it private party. And even more so does that apply where you can get real value for your car. And the same thing goes for business, right? Is the more effort you put into getting it ready for that sale, the better the price that you'll fix or that you'll get. And part of that comes in building systems that make it so that you are not the value. Because if you're the value in the business and you leave the business because you're selling it and you want out, then you have no value. And so the buyer isn't going to pay for that because you're leaving. That's the whole point. So the more systematized you can make it, so you're putting in those bells and those whistles with selling it, you're going to fetch a much higher price in that category for selling.
So to bring a little bit of context to all of this, I think buying and selling a business is probably not something that's top of mind for a lot of my audience, because I would imagine if I'm putting myself in their shoes, they probably think, oh, well, only, like really big companies do that. Like tech startups do that, right? They start a business, get a lot of investment with the idea to sell. Like my little old business over here, not going to be relevant to me. But I'm wondering, and of course the prices are going to vary wildly, but for small businesses, maybe you have you want to buy a business that's doing 50,000 a year in revenue, $100,000 a year in revenue. What kind of purchase price are we talking about for that kind of a business?
Well, that's kind of one of those misnomers that people don't understand about buying a business. It's actually a really great way to get started in entrepreneurship, because you can actually finance the part of the purchase of the business with the assets of the business. And that's unique because you can't do that if you're just starting a business, right? There are no assets, so there's nothing to finance, and you have to go based on your entire word. But if you have a business that's doing $1 million a year, maybe you only have to come up with 100,000, and the rest of the 900,000 could be financed through SBA loans or different types of financing arrangements that you can get, because that business that you're looking at is has a track record, right? It has assets, it has the P&Ls, it has the necessary things to make it worthwhile for a lender to lend money based on those assets. As far as selling goes, the best thing I can tell you is, number one, get an independent valuation done of the business to begin with before you do anything, right? If you're even thinking of it in the back of your head going, man, maybe I might want to do that someday. Maybe not, but you getting an independent valuation of your business gives you a baseline, so that you can say, what do I need to do to get to the amount that I want to retire with, so that I can build my business to that point. But if you have no baseline, if you have no that beginning phase, then you're just kind of throwing a dartboard in the dark, right? You might hit it, you might get where you're hoping to get, but probably not. And so that's where I always use to tell people to start is look at that independent valuation. And there's lots of steps that you can take to start building that business to the point where it's sellable. Because most small businesses aren't, right? They're too much in-house knowledge, too many issues that go with that. But you can definitely start. Like if you start.
When it comes to the valuation, are there companies that just do that, or would you just go talk to like a CPA to do that?
So there are independent business valuators, and they are pretty prevalent. They charge, it depends on the assets of the business.
Yeah.
And some of them will even just say, hey, look, if you don't really have any assets, then you're just worth what you're worth, right? Like, and they'll give you on the lowdown. They won't even do any work for you. I mean, they won't charge you anything for it because it's so easy for them to just tell you the number. But the most common price is about 3 times your revenue, just to kind of give you an idea of, and that's an overgeneralization,
Yeah.
but it's a something to get started with. So if your revenue is 90,000, then you're looking at, 240,000 value, right?
Got it.
Roughly.
Okay. And when we say revenue, we're talking about like annual revenue.
Correct. And that's obviously gross, not net, because your taxes and deductions and all that other stuff apply too. So don't think that, that's like, oh, I get to walk out the door with $240,000. More likely than not, you're not going to get 240,000 for that business. It's possible
So
later.
you're saying the valuation would be on net income, not gross income, or the opposite?
Gross. Yep, gross.
Okay, it would be on gross income. So if I'm the buyer and their gross income is $100,000 and they're asking me for 300, I, as the buyer, am thinking, okay, well, on paper, that sounds reasonable, but if you're only operating at 20% profit, it's going to take me a long time to get my ROI. Not looking like a pretty good deal now.
Right, exactly. And that's why that's a kind of
ballpark.
That's exactly. That's just a number to go, okay, that's something to work with. If you want real numbers, you're going to have to do some work for it. Like, I mean, with the business valuation and some other steps that you can take to get that business to where it's in a good place to move. It's again, it's about putting that paint,
Yeah, I like this idea and this concept of actually buying a business to get started, or maybe not even kind of getting started, but maybe if you're doing a pivot, right? So I feel like this could make sense for someone who's been in business for 5-10 years and they want to pivot, but maybe they don't want to start over. You're confident enough in your own business acumen that you can make a business work, but you don't want to start from the ground up. I can imagine that, getting the capital together, getting a loan for $200,000, $300,000 would be still pretty scary if you have no experience, but maybe more palatable if you already have the confidence in yourself to do it.
That's part of it. Yeah. I think the real, it's not so much a confidence. I think that's a part of it, but if you're truly an entrepreneur, you're looking at ways to systematize and improve businesses. And so I'm not saying that people that own small businesses aren't entrepreneurs, but some people are better entrepreneurs than others. But if you can take a profitable company that is, it doesn't have the bells and the whistles, right? If it doesn't have those things, if it doesn't have economies of scale, it doesn't have JIT manufacturing, whatever it is, if you can take those profitable companies that don't have modern technologies and implement that modern technology, then that's just going to improve that profitability that much further.
Oh yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of room for that in the industry where we work in. So maybe people can ask themselves, because I would imagine this happens all the time, right? If you're the type of person where people come up to you and they're like, how do you get your business to run so streamlined, right? Like, how do you have so many clients and you actually manage to have time off? Well, it's probably tipping you off that you're running things pretty well, right? So imagine if you could step into another company and just implement the same systems that you already have, how much could you increase their profit? So now we're talking like an entrepreneur really buying a new business because, maybe they already have the client base, but they can squeeze a lot more profit out of that business by making some tweaks and changes. That sounds more like what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, especially like you said, in our industry, that if your profit margin is 20% and you can squeeze out another 30% just by implementing systems and efficiencies, then wow, especially when we're talking in thousands of dollars of revenue, right? I mean, that's money in your pocket. So, I mean, and that's part of the process that you'll go through when you're looking at this business, and you're looking to potentially buy, or as far as selling, the less the person has to do on that other end, the more value that it has for them, right? So if you've already done these steps, then all of a sudden your company could, be fetching 10x instead of
Yeah.
3x,
Yeah, but then I feel like then like a house analogy would almost be even better, right? So it's like you're gonna flip a house, you find a house that's a mess, you're not gonna spend as much money on it, but then your potential ROI is gonna be a lot higher. You buy a business that's already streamlined and systemized, same kind of thing, it's gonna cost you more. So it's kind of, you have to like weigh these factors, right?
Well, and that's exactly right. And one of the things, again, the buyer's interest is get as cheap as possible, and then build, right, and then improve those things. The house analogy works, but the vehicle analogy works better for the seller, right? Because the seller is going to want as much money as possible. So that's why
Right.
I was saying that when you combine those two, you can get a fair price that is going to be somewhere in that middle-ish range.
You know
So,
what I think we need to do, Taylor? I think that we need to, maybe this is already what you're doing. We'll have to talk about your business marketing strategy after this podcast, is go out there and convince all these people in the coaching, because coaching business is huge
oh yeah,
nowadays.
it's huge.
Convince all these people like, hey, if you're so great at systems and optimizing a business, why don't you just go buy some businesses, make them a lot more profitable? And
Business
that sounds
flipping.
sounds like it could be a much more lucrative way to make money than coaching other people on how to optimize their own businesses. For some, not for everyone.
Yeah, business flipping. I mean, that's basically what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Is that, do people do that? Do people like buy with the intent to like flip and sell a business, or is that not really a thing?
I haven't heard of it as being a thing. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I haven't heard of it. I think most people that are buying businesses are looking to buy, streamline, and then get it as more of a passive income sort of scenario, right? Where
Yeah.
they've
Yeah.
optimized it and now they just get to sit back and kind of relax and enjoy the profits.
Yeah,
So
I just recently, I always say read, listen to the audiobook, same thing. The book Clockwork by Mike
right.
Michalowicz, if
Mhm.
anyone's familiar with it, creator also of Profit First. And in his mind, creating a business that runs like clockwork means the business can literally run without you, right? So
Yep.
I think that would be the idea for a lot of these people. You buy the business, you get it to run without you, then why would you sell it at that point? It's income generating without you having to be active in the business. So that sounds wonderful.
But those are the most profitable. That's the best part, is
Yeah.
that, and those are the easiest to sell, because a lot of times one of the issues that people have is that they start way too late. They haven't implemented any systems. They haven't done the work to get it to sell. They're looking at, oh, I want to retire, I'm done, or they're just exhausted, which I completely understand that. But they haven't put in that work. So if you're putting in the work from day one of looking to build, and then you build the business to sell, then not only can it create that passive income, but then when you do get ready to sell it, it's worth a whole lot more money than if you'd have just kind of like, the car analogy comes back, is if you don't change the oil, you don't keep it washed, you don't take care of it, and the paint job looks like crap, and the engine's running terrible, then it's going to be a lot harder to sell that car. Same thing goes with the business. If you're accounting and your intellectual property and your contracts are all just kind of like, then your value isn't there, and it's going to be a lot harder to sell it, and you're going to be a lot more miserable in that respect too while you're running it.
Yeah, you brought up trademark, you brought up contract as well. Let's talk about intellectual property for just a minute. When it comes to the trademark, this is obviously an asset, right? So we have
Right.
lots of different assets in our business. How important do you think the IP is when it comes to buying and selling a business? Like, does all that stuff need to be registered? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So ideally, yes, because you're building a brand at that point, which has infinitely more value than a non-branded entity.
Hmm.
And what do I mean by that? A branded entity. So I mean, think Apple, right? You're just buying a computer at the end of the day, right? That's all it is a computer. But now you're buying an Apple. It's worth easily 3 times what the price of a normal computer would be, simply because they threw a logo on it. But it's backed uh, by that quality that goes with Apple. And I'm not an Apple. Okay, I'm an Apple fanboy, but I'm not saying it in an Apple fanboy sort of way. And so trademarks and intellectual property build value because that's something that you can have as an asset, right? It's something that shows, like coming back to the car analogy, if you've got your intellectual property, it shows that you've taken care of your business and you've built it for a brand, as opposed to Joe's Plumbing, right? That you can't really trademark that per se. I mean, anyway, without getting into too much detail, the idea that the computer is only worth so much, but an Apple computer is worth so much more. And that's really what we're talking about, is branding and building a brand, not just a business. And that can be infinitely have more value. I mean, like I said, Apple has way more value than a computer manufacturer that isn't Apple, right?
Yeah, can you build a brand that can successfully be sold when that brand is a personal brand?
You
I can give some
can.
examples as well. What?
Yeah, I think you can. I think it really depends on what you're trying to sell, brand wise. Like,
Yeah, so I'm
Tom
thinking of
Ford.
a lot of my audience, wedding professionals, creatives, they have their businesses named after themselves. So like
Sure.
your business, well, no, your business is not named after yourself,
No.
probably because maybe you thought about this before you
Hmm.
picked your business name.
Yep.
My business is named after myself, but I actually was just thinking a couple weeks ago, I went on Audible. I have like 10 credits. I needed to get a book. I say needed to get a book. I was literally about to put my car in drive to go drive for an hour. And I was like, I need to download a book so I can like listen to it while I'm driving. And I didn't want to take a long time to like go on Google or like ask people. So I just went to the recommended tab. And I've been kind of binge listening personal finance books. So I listened to this one clip. I was like, this sounds great. I'll download it. I'll listen to it in 2 or 3 days. And in the introduction, after I already paid for it, I learned that it was written by Dave Ramsey's daughter. And I'm not like a huge Dave Ramsey fan. I've talked about it on the podcast, but it kind of made me think, you know what? Well, she works in his company. I wouldn't be surprised if she eventually took over the company. And then I thought the same thing about Michael Hyatt's company. If you follow Michael Hyatt, his daughter works full time in the company. And I think that she's probably like next in line to be CEO. So family run businesses, like it passes down, right? And they kind of, I see these people bringing in a new person, getting them in front of the audience so they're introduced to them before, they maybe step out and retire. And I've always thought that if you had a personal brand, especially where you're really prevalent on social media, like you might have to do the same thing if you ever wanted to sell, like kind of be there, coexist with this person for a little while, unless, people already expect that they're not working with you per se when they come into the company.
Right. I think, like Tom Ford, Ralph Lauren, um, Marriott, these names that we all are all familiar with, that we associate with those particular brands. I think it's possible. I think it's harder to sell those types of brands because of that association that we
Yeah.
automatically go with. I'm not saying it's impossible, but then you run into the quality issue, right? Because you associate certain things with quality. And with a personal brand, I've seen it happen where people will have a personal brand, which is great, except for then they sell it and the quality of that is no longer the same because the next person thinks that they should do something different. And it's their company to do that. But the issue then becomes quality as opposed to the name recognition that goes with it, as opposed to if you're picking a non-personal brand, then you can build it and it's easier to transfer because I'm not the brand, right? I'm not that person. That perception is that it's somebody else is already, right? So it has different value
Yeah.
metrics.
This is why I think like obviously long-term planning is so important. And I would say, if you don't know where you're going to go, then maybe like obviously don't make any rash decisions. But maybe if you've been running your company for 10 years and you think, you know what, I do want to retire in 10 or 15 years, and selling my business could be a great way for me to do that. Do you think it would be worth looking into a rebrand at that point in time so that you could, actually have that established for the long term, if that's kind of your game plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on where you're already at. Like, I wouldn't rebrand Ralph Lauren, right? I mean,
Right,
like
right,
that would just
right.
be silly. Like that would be a bad idea. But
Yeah,
if
could you
you
imagine
are
Gucci comes out tomorrow and just decides that they're going to change their signature print?
right, that would just be I I would be shocked that that would happen. But if you are a non-brand brand at this point, if you're kind of on that, if you're not already an established brand, and you're looking at personal versus non-personal brand, yes, I would say, 10, 15 years, you've got plenty of time to establish yourself, to rebrand, to be able to give yourself that time to get there. But there's no guarantees, right? I mean, you could put all that energy and effort and it be unsuccessful. Now, that's a different topic for a different day. But yeah, if you've got plenty of time to rebrand, if you're trying to retire in 3 to 5 years, probably not, because it's not enough time to build that brand.
Yeah, so kind of pivoting here. One of the reasons I had the idea to do this episode. So first of all, I just did an interview last week with my friend Amber. Everyone should go back and listen to it because we talked about her personal experience selling her old company, buying a new one. But just in the past month, I've seen either on Facebook or people have personally talked to me about how their dream is to own a wedding venue. So I know it's like pretty specific. It's like three separate people. But
Right.
I was just thinking in the back of my mind, that's something like I would much prefer to just buy the business rather than like buy the land and property. Because if I'm like buying the land and property, then I have to like go out and get it permitted and like do all that kind of stuff. Just rather just like, buy a wedding venue business. Um, I had a question that was going to go at the end of that story, but now I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, just the point. Like the point I wanted to make is that seems to be like a goal for a lot of people. Like you might have a goal to run a certain kind of business, buy a certain kind of business, sell your business, and these are things that we have to think about, like well in advance, so that we can work up towards it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point. Like, buying the land, building gives you the custom experience that you want to be able to deliver, but it doesn't get you there quicker, and it's certainly more expensive,
Yeah,
because just of the nature of it. But it's going to be exactly what you want. So it really depends on the person, right? It depends on their goals. And if you are, no, I don't want to deal with any of that junk, which is understandable because it's a lot, then it's a smart way to go and buy a wedding venue and remodel it if that's the goal. Because as I tell this to my podcast, my YouTube channel all the time, I said, things take longer than you hope and are more expensive than you want, right? And cost overruns, and it can kill a project versus one that maybe you start with a venue that you really love and then you buy another one after that you build, right? Because you've already got this established idea and you need a different motif, or you need a different type of what you want to present, right? Different type of wedding venue. So that would be probably where I would use that one at if it were me trying to build that type of wedding
nice.
business. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the practical steps. You already mentioned the valuation. I'm assuming that it's basically valuation contract. That's like all we're really looking at. But when it comes to actually buying or selling a business, are there any other steps that need to go in there?
Sure. There's actually a lot of steps. It's not a short
Okay.
process. That's not something that you want to start on a Friday and expect to be done by a Monday. That just
Right.
isn't going to happen. So number one, you're going to want to get your financials in order. That's your big thing. A lot of small business owners I know, do their P&Ls once a year, maybe. They should obviously do them more, but you should get your financials in order, and that includes your bookkeeping to make sure that your profits and losses are in order. And then if you're looking at you want to get your contracts in order, any type of formalities that go with you, if it's a corporation or even if it's an LLC, but obviously a corporation has more. And those are the other parts. You want to ramp up your marketing, right? Because as I was saying earlier, the more brand, it's putting that clear coat, the pretty on your brand to be able to sell it. The more prevalent you are, the more you're going to value. What's fun about it is that when you're looking at selling and you're doing all of these steps, it's really about running your business systematically to create that value. So anytime you can implement those systems, so you're going to take your employees and you're going to have them start writing out systems, and you're going to have them documented so that it's clear, and that the next person that steps into that role can be very successful. So systems is another thing. If you haven't got your trademarks, your intellectual property, copyrights, patents, if you're in that kind of industry, start working on those now. A trademark can take anywhere between 6 months and a year minimum. It takes
It's looking
3 months.
right now, it's looking a lot like a year.
Yeah.
A year further, because the USPTO is like crazy right now.
It is. In fact, I had a trademark that I did, it was before the pandemic, and it took a year because of the trademark attorney that was reviewing it was being a pain. So and then the client was taking forever to get me things, and so it's one of those things that you need to start today. So those are your big ones. Those are your ones that are going to make the value the fastest, is making sure you're doing it. When you get a little bit closer to time, you're going to want to start worrying about not only that second valuation, because remember, you want to do this valuation long before, so you know where you're starting with. You're going to want to do a second valuation before you begin the process, so that you know where you're at there, so that it's not, you don't want to get into a relationship with somebody that brings their valuation and you don't have your own, because they're going to undervalue you just by their default, and you're going to overvalue you just by your default. And so by kind of combining things and going, okay, everybody has their own perspective, but let's talk about the middle manager. Then you're going to want to worry about doing your due diligence, right? You're going to want to make sure that all of these things are in order, so that on the buyer, that it's going to be, okay, you're ready to go. They have the funds, or they can get the funds, that type of thing. So, yeah.
All right. And when it comes to working with a professional, because, obviously we don't want anyone doing this on their own, especially when it comes to the legal documentation part. But do they go to an attorney? Obviously, once they get to the documentation, right? Like, we already have all the deals done. We need paperwork. An attorney can help with that. But ideally, do they want to go to someone like yourself earlier in the process? Do you help people navigate all those steps you just mentioned?
The earlier, the better, because, and this happens a lot with small businesses, what you don't know. And there's a real issue with, you start navigating it, and there are pitfalls. Like, are you going to indemnify the previous owners? And that's a fancy word for give them a get out of jail free card. And so there's these different technicalities that you want, or not technicalities, these different parts that you want to plan for, right? And the worst thing you can do is wait till you're in a bind and you need to sell yesterday to do this, because that's when you're going to get taken advantage of. That's when you're going to lose money on the deal instead of make money on the deal. Whenever you're dealing with time, if someone gets that sniff that you're needing it more than you should, then they're going to be like, oh, okay, I'll offer you $15,000, even though it's probably worth, 100,000, because they sense that needy factor, right? And so
Yes.
the sooner in the process that you can engage CPA for your books, attorney for your corporate formalities, as well as to prepare your business for that, because then we can sit down and like really look at those potential skeletons that everybody has. This isn't a judgment, it's just a truth, right? Like, everybody is human, and so every business is like every human, it's imperfect, but we can sit down and we can remedy those things ahead of time, right? So, like, for instance, in the car analogy, we can buff out your headlights, so to speak. We can get those paint chips taken care of. We can get that clear coat fixed. We can do all of these steps to begin with, so that we can get your car ready to be sold. But if you bring it to us at the last second, well, it's going to be, one, a lot more expensive, and two, maybe there's things that we can't fix, or that it's not worth fixing because of the cost.
Right.
So, yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. So I think we learned a lot. I think we covered a lot today. Thank you for sharing all of your awesome knowledge. The last question I always leave people with, I have a Facebook group called Braden's Besties. I encourage everyone to go join. If anyone wants to become one of Taylor's besties, follow you, learn from you, where is the best place for them to do that?
I'm everywhere under Think Legal PC. I also have a Facebook group called Tactical Startup, and
Nice.
I'm pretty much everywhere. Instagram, Think Legal PC, Facebook, Think Legal PC. Honestly, my YouTube channel is where I get published most of my content at. So, and that's youtube.com, Think Legal PC. So,
All
pretty
right,
easy.
awesome. We will get all of those links in the show notes. So as always, you all can go to the show notes, check them out. Taylor, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Braden, for having me. I appreciate it.